So welcome everybody to this next session of Indic Studies Toronto. Today the topic is Indigenous Canadians, and on June 21st, we are celebrating the National Indigenous Peoples Day. So this is Canada's 25th anniversary of celebrating the heritage, diverse cultures and outstanding achievements of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. So today we have our speaker, Lee Maracle, who was born in North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and is from the Stolo Nation. She is an award-winning author and a teacher at the University of Toronto, and she is going to give us an introduction to the Indigenous culture of Canada and the history and the heritage. So thanks a lot, Lee Maracle, for doing this presentation, and please welcome, and you can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, sorry, I want to clarify that this is not a Canadian holiday, that she would just declare a day in which we could celebrate ourselves. And some Canadians do participate in events that are celebrated by ourselves, but the Canadian government is not, as far as I know, officially doing anything on this day any more than they do any other day. July is the first is the Canadian sort of holiday for itself. I think that I want to say that Canada is not even really a newborn country, because we're not really a part of it, and until we are, it's not not quite yet born. So it thinks it's 150 years old, and it's entitled to think whatever it likes, because of course they have the army, the police, and the power and the population, and they have been dominating us for a long time, since they came here as British initially, and then later on Britain handed the country to Canada. Now, Britain has a history of doing that. It has handed an awful lot of countries to people that, you know, have no business owning the country. Initially, it gave Rhodesia to white Rhodesians, and then eventually it became Zimbabwe, and it is now a democracy. I don't think that changed things for Zimbabweans very much, because the inequality that existed between white Rhodesians and African Zimbabweans still exists. There's still inequities in that country. Likewise with South Africa, even with Mandela being the leader for quite a long time, there is still tremendous inequality in South Africa. I was there, a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, I think. It'd be just before COVID hit. And one of the South African women said, "We've been here 350,000 years." And she looked right at the white South Africans sitting around the table and said, "Surely something in my culture was valuable." So nothing about South African culture is being taught in the schools. And that strikes me, because we have the same situation here. There's an awful lot of talk about restoring our languages, but we don't have any funds designated for that. There's an awful lot of talk about including Indigenous people in, the study of Canada, but there's no funds designated for that. There's an awful lot of talk about restoring our national territories, but we're not discussing what nations are, and we aren't given either the time or the funds to engage in that discussion, despite the fact that we were overrun and killed very, very deliberately. The Beothuk particularly are a good example. They're part of the Mi'kmaq Confederacy. And they were very deliberately killed. There were bounties put on their scalps and so on to prove that you had killed them. And they became our first completely eradicated population in Newfoundland and part of Labrador. Nothing has been done to remedy that history. We also have had lots of discussions about amongst ourselves about residential school, and now we found out that, of course, what we believed to be true was true, that our children were killed there and they were not returned. We were told about the children in Kamloops that they had run away and that they were never found. And of course, that wasn't true. The bodies have been found. We also know that the girls were and the boys were raped mercilessly in all of those institutions. In fact, friends wrote friends letters about how they could access 12 to 13-year-old girls. Anytime, you should come and work here. And so the people that came to so-called educate us were actually, many of them were predators. And that was acceptable. It was acceptable then, and it is still acceptable now because there's no Canadian objection. When Harper apologized for forced assimilation, I think that's what he called it, which was not true because we weren't taught to read and write. We never studied literature at any of those institutions. There was no study of any Canadian literature or Indigenous literature or English literature at any of the institutions that we attended. So it wasn't an assimilation program so much as a repression program. The repression was, of course, of our own culture. Now, that's the cruelty, I think, that is often forgotten. Here these people are not being allowed to speak their language, but not really learning English either. So we ended in a terrible state of limbo and misqualification. We did our best to learn English from listening. We're great listeners. And we did our best to learn English from translation, translating from our own languages to English. But because our languages were so repressed, we became what my great-grandmother called crippled two tongues. We had two languages, but we don't speak either of them well. The other thing is our beliefs about the world, about ourselves, about the human body, about the human relation to the natural world was determined to be primitive, savage, barbaric, unbelievable, discredited at every turn. And some of those things are actually now a matter of science. We have always believed that the language you are born with is part of your body. The body has an intelligence system. We've always said this. And of course, they're finding out that that's true. In every cell, there's a little metaneuron, and that holds the memory of all time, that the body itself knows its language. Now, we have a war going on inside ourselves between our language and English, and this war keeps us from learning anything new. It also keeps us from contributing to our own social and scientific development. It keeps us in a state of disbelief in self. And that's what the foundation of emotional and mental illness is all about. I'm surprised at the sanity we exhibit given the treatment that we've had. And I think it has to do with the strength of our culture. Prior to anyone arriving here, we had been through several historical periods, which my people called the first world, second world, third world, and finally we're in the fourth world. The first world was the business of being conceived and born. And that takes thousands of years for humans to conceive of themselves. They have to go through a number of historical events. They have to go through a number of historical attempts at engagement of one another, of the land around them, of the world itself. And eventually we came to understand our relationship to the natural world. And I think it's expressed in a number of ways, but one is our gratitude for the sky, the earth, the trees, the humans, the animals, the waters, the sea people, and referring to things as people, not just humans. The opposite is true of Europeans. They differentiate themselves from and alienate themselves from the natural world. They don't think of trees, for instance, as still people. That's what we call them. The story we have is that they agreed to be still and keep the viruses and bacteria in the root systems of their bodies so that we could stay well. And that was an experience after the flood. We almost died out on this continent, and the trees rescued us. And so they've been still ever since. And science now agrees that, you know, the only reason that trees don't move is they're too busy growing. But we know that the world didn't look like it does now. When Europeans came here, Catalana tells us they changed everything, including the way we eat. And I think that's part of the terrible inheritance that we have, is that the body operates on a simple recognition system when it comes to food. I recognize certain kinds of food as something my body is familiar with, that is a nutrient to my body. I don't recognize other things because my body has no experience with it. Some of the things that we're not able to consume are wheat and dairy and, you know, all that sort of thing, although eggs, we're very familiar with eggs. We ate them before. So when we come to food that we have never eaten before, the body has a system of rejecting it and alerting us to that. Sometimes it's called food sensitivity, and sometimes it's called allergy, but basically we have a body that has been eating in a certain way for thousands and thousands of years. The other thing is that each of us has our own mythology, and it is mythology. There is no way to verify that we came across the Bering Strait. No one can verify that for us. We believe we've been here since time immemorial. Now, they're starting to find things that are kind of interesting in Mexico, Mexica, where that's what we call it. For instance, they're finding they found a mastodon that was killed by a human 140,000 years ago. So because Europeans don't want to face that we've been here all along, they say someone else was here before us, and we're aliens from the sky world, or we came from, you know, across the Bering Strait and killed the people that were here before, basically calling us colonizers, because that's what they are. We're judged by what they are and not by the history of the island. Well, the history of the island is itself something, and it's not studied apart from the desire of Europeans to claim it. So I think that's an important thing to remember, that we need to study it in and of itself. Even some of their philosophers, like Karl Marx, believes this, that we need to study things in and of themselves and then examine our relationship to what that is. And that's not what happens when it comes to North America. There's a mythology that Europe hangs on to, that we came from somewhere else. and that they're just another wave of humans colonizing North America. The last thing is that when the Europeans first heard Harper apologize to us for this so-called attempt to assimilate us, the response was vitriolic. A lot of Canadians wrote in that they wouldn't apologize to any of these parasites. We are considered parasites. And I know that Canada has engineered that very, very deliberately. They don't refer to the payments that we receive as treaty payments. They just say they gave us so many $billion, as though we were sitting there waiting for them to give us this money and not doing anything on our own. They don't say that we were prohibited from hunting and fishing and food gathering and engaging our own resources. They don't say that we're oppressed nations that have been denied the authority to behave in a governmental way for ourselves. That's not what they say. They behave as though we are a parasitic people, dependent completely on them for our sustenance. And they refer to us in that way, that Canada gave us these many dollars. It's not considered rent for the land they took. It's not considered repayment for what was stolen or what we were prohibited from engaging. None of that is discussed, and Canadians then have an attitude toward us that is very, very, very negative. And our history does not count anywhere. We are not considered capable of engaging ourselves in any kind of historical fashion. That is left to Europeans. And I have to say that that's the case pretty much all over the world. I was in India and I started to recite Yeats, you know, when he says, "The center will not hold." And all the older people that had been educated by the British clapped and got all excited because I could recite Yeats. And then I stopped and I looked at them and I said, who does he think he is? The center of the world? And then the young people clapped. Because we're all, the people of the world are all very fatigued by the notion that we're worthless and only Europe is worthy of knowing, being, teaching, and engaging. And that's, I think that's where we are now, is that we have struggled, I think since Fanon, Frantz Fanon, who wrote Wretched of the Earth, the Dame de la Terre, actually the Damned of the Earth. And we started to study it in the 60s and 70s, or whenever it came out. Whenever it first came out, it became what they call the Bible of the Third World. And we started to realize that we have to engage one another before we can engage others, that we have to know who we are before we can engage with others. Otherwise, we become a caricature of who we once were. And that's really a cartoon, and we need to get away from that. And so we need to start to look at, who am I and how did I get here? And I know that I am a Tsleil-Waututh Stalo, and that the Stalo are part of the Coast Salish people. And the Coast Salish people are mainly in Washington and part of Montana and a little bit in Canada. But we have a culture, we have a language, we have a confederacy, and we had engaged in a certain way of living prior to Europeans coming here. We're nowhere close to that, not because we cannot do it, but because we are not permitted. We are still not permitted to just be. And I think a Maori first said that in Holland. They just won't let us be. We just want to be. And I think when I think of the Coast Salish people and the relations we had before, Hawaii was the largest oceanic nation in the world for all of history when Europeans first came here. And now it's, of course, belongs to the American oppressive regime was taken over. But we had relations with Hawaii. Our welcome poles, you can draw a straight line between our welcome poles on the West Coast and hit Honolulu. We had relations with Hawaii. We had relations with Ainu. The Ainu people used the same ovoids to make their clothing. We had relations with the Micronesians, Melanesians, Filipinos, all over the Pacific. We had relationships with the human beings there long before Europeans came to North America, and we're just beginning to restore those relations after a half millennia of murder and mayhem at the hands of Europeans. And Europeans still haven't faced that what they've done to us. They haven't faced the level of death and destruction. They keep telling us that we're back to our original population. We know we're not. There were millions of us before, and that's the Coast Salish people alone were millions strong. Death and disease and diseased blankets and so on and so forth is what demolished us and what killed us before Europeans came. Even recently, when the people of the North got hantavirus and the young people were dying from it, and they asked Canada for help with medicine, Harper sent them body bags. That's a cynical colonialism. There was no outcry from Canadians at the time that this happened, and this is in my later lifetime. This is when I was an older person. And that's when I started to get involved in actually voting in the Canadian election. I don't think it's really a powerful move to vote in the Canadian election, but it is at least an opportunity to protest the colonial relationship between ourselves and Canada. And so that's why I do it. It's a protest action. And we still don't have territoriality. And I want to explain that because we're sitting in the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon. That I'm a guest here, and I try to be a good guest. And so I refer to this territory as the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon. It is Anishinaabe and their allies and the Haudenosaunee, which is the Six Nations Confederacy, and all those people that are allied with them. We are allied with the Confederacy and therefore allied with the Anishinaabe. And that means that we got to abide by their laws. And the first one that I learned about was take only what you need. Take only what you need. So then we have to discuss, well, what exactly does a human being need? Well, we need a social life, we need a cultural life, and we need to eat and we need shelter. So beyond that, we don't have that many needs. In this society, though, we've been trained to need things that are totally absurd. We are engaging in the plastics industry on an unprecedented scale. We use plastic bags to bag up garbage. We create constantly garbage, and then we bag it up in plastic and destroy landfills all over the place. That's not what was here before. I can remember my mother on her deathbed saying, I created no garbage. I lived 73 years without creating garbage. And I can remember being a child and saying, Mom, all you got to do is buy a garbage can. These people throw it away. And she looked and she said, There is no place called away. That stuck with me. There is no place called away. And so we need to have a reconsider. I have a lot of cloth in my room, and it's cloth that I picked up here and there. People gave me bits, or it's cloth from gifts from other people, or it's cloth from a skirt that I once had, or a sheet I once had. And I cut it up into squares and I make people blankets. You can see them on Facebook if you're interested in seeing the blankets that I make for others. I make pillowcases. I'm going to make my dog a little pillow as well. But I still have tons of this cloth left over from my life. It's been a part of my life since I was in my 20s. And I used to have it wall to wall, but now it's just a little stack, 5 or 6 bins high. I imagine by the time I pass on that I will have used up all the cloth that I have had in my lifetime, either given to me or shared with me or purchased at various secondhand stores. I don't buy things new because that uses new energy, and that's what the waste is coming from, the constant use of the new energy from the earth, the waste of energy. So I urge Canadians to live a different life, to have a different look at what's around them, and have a different definition of what they think they need, as Indigenous people are doing right now. I don't know how much more you want me to say, but I think I pretty much had enough. If you have any questions, then I'm happy to entertain them.
What's causing the modern pandemic, from the COVID outbreak, from your cultural point of view? What do you think is causing it?
We would have to study that the same way that others are currently studying it. But I will tell you this, that clear cutting lets viruses and bacteria and diseases that the trees have agreed to hold still in their root systems, it's letting it into the atmosphere. There's all kinds of illnesses that are existing today that didn't exist before. Some of them cause paralysis and then death, and that is going on. That's not a pandemic, but it's definitely going on. So I think that the clear cutting that's letting all this illness into the atmosphere has something to do with that. But there's also, what do you call it when two things come together to create something new? I can't remember the science word you
It's called synergy or something.
What is it?
Synergy, or is it something?
Synergy, that's one. But when a virus mutates.
That's right, yeah.
There's a lot of mutation going on, so new viruses are being created through that process. Especially now with all the clear cutting, that we know that particularly in the Amazon and other places where clear cutting is going on, these things are occurring, and it is affecting the existing viral populations. We don't know what's underneath the ground where the trees are. So when you clear cut, they say that something like 60 new viruses are let into the atmosphere every day, some people say, every hour, other people say. But we do know viruses are being let into the atmosphere as we clear cut. The amount of clear cutting is insane. We don't know how much it is. We don't get to see it. But the whole of the Amazon is under attack. The whole of the west coast of BC has been under attack for almost 100 years now. And the clear cutting has been incredible. 19 million board feet of lumber a year is taken out of British Columbia forests, and they're using helicopters and all kinds of things to get the wood out. Now, I don't know if our story is true that the viruses live inside the root systems, but the viruses are being let into the atmosphere as the clear cutting goes on, and no study is happening around it. So I'm thinking that that story is true. People don't have stories for no reason. I want you to think about that. You know, the story of Moses and the 10 Commandments is a lasting story because of the laws that came out of it. I don't know if everything that the Bible says has a foundation, but there's an awful lot of study going on about the possibilities of those stories having foundations in truth. That's what we need to do. We need to look at stories and we need to say, could this possibly be? And if it is, what can we do to reverse the trend? I hope that answers your question.
I would like to ask you one simple question. How do you see the future of indigenous people here in North America?
I have no way, I'm not a forecaster or a prophet, you know, I have no way of telling you an answer to that. But I want to say this because it has something to do with what you said earlier about being part of the colonial process. The reason that you want to come here is you're seeking, your people are seeking wealth. There's poverty wherever you go in the third world. And so people come here seeking wealth. And I want to go back to what I said about how we view our lives, that you take only what you need. And if you take more than you need, you're going to have to answer for that in the afterlife. So I'm more concerned about what's going to happen to us in the afterlife. When I go to meet my ancestors in the afterworld, in the spirit world, I want to be able to tell them the story of my life, and they will know that my life was a continuation of their life, which was a continuation of their ancestral life, which was a continuation of the life here in North America. That the laws that we embrace are still the same. That we need to embrace the law of take only what you need. We do not need wealth. That is not what we need. The earth is suffering from that constant extraction and bleeding it of wealth. And we need to back that up and reverse it. And we need to encourage people to do something different. Now, that being said, what's my future? My future is to continuously try to influence the people on this continent to do the right thing. But I am not entitled to force anyone to do the right thing. That is a privilege that Europe has accorded itself. And it has accorded other people that privilege as long as they agree with them. They agree that, you know, the queen is the queen, then we'll let you help force others to do whatever it is that we want to do, that is extract wealth from the earth. No, that's not where I'm going. And I'm always talking to my own family and my own community and my own nations about not going that way. Now, we're referred to as the most stubborn and recalcitrant people on earth because we just can't be mentally colonized. No one has managed to change our belief systems so far. So that's where we are. It's where we've been for half a millennia. We've been killed, we've been tortured, we've been made sick. Our children have been killed and tortured and made sick, but we still won't give up who we are. That's where we are now. And I'm thinking that I can't imagine what they've got coming down the pipe that would change that. I can't imagine how that's going to change. So that's as much of an answer as I can give you.
It feels that we are linked to you.
Yes, I
Thank you.
think we are all related, all of us, all humans, all beings, all, even stones are our relatives. You know, we are all connected together. And so we need to pay attention to that.
I'm from Trinidad and in the West Indies, and we have been taught a very similar British-Spanish version of the history to Trinidadians. Having said that, where can we learn the actual entire history of the first peoples of Canada? Whether it be books or anything else you can recommend.
Okay. That's kind of an unfair question. I think I explained to you that we weren't allowed to learn English in residential school, and we weren't allowed to speak our language. So the transmission of our culture is through the language. We were separated from our families. For 150 years, we were separated from our families, and we were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So it is impossible for us to know what our ancestors knew. If you think about that even for 10 seconds, that you learned from people transmitting to you what it is they knew. Okay, so we didn't get an opportunity to learn that. We are just now beginning to do that kind of research and try and begin again. And I think that our ceremonies is where we started, because that's how we came to know things. I don't know how Europeans came to know things. I know that they like to take things apart. I'll tell you this one little story. The crabs were walking on the shores, and our crabs are deep sea animals. And so someone phoned me and said, the crabs are walking on the land. What's going on? I said, I don't know, but Florine's the oldest person in my community. I'll ask her. And she said, the only thing I know about crabs walking on the land is during the floods, which is 15,000 years ago or so. They came and started walking on the land. And so we knew that something was wrong. And we planted eelgrass, and that fixed it. And I said, toxicity. And she said, maybe. And I said, well, I'll tell this fellow your answer. And so I told him, get one of your European environmental scientist friends to take a vial of the water and see what's poisoning it, because they're warning us to stay, not to drink the water. So he did, and it turned out there was 90 times more cadmium in the water than was safe. Picture that for just a second. And so he said to me, what will we do? And I said, well, she said, plant eelgrass. And the scientist said, well, we have to study it. And the gentleman, my friend, said to the scientist, no, you have to study it. We have to plant eelgrass. So we planted the eelgrass. And within a couple of years, the cadmium levels went back to safe levels. So we remedied it. But that's how we came to our science, is through ceremony and through transmission. We made sure that we had this skeleton of how to know, and we passed it on to our children. So the body of the knowledge isn't there, but the framework for arriving at it is, and we're starting to do that. I know that I've walked down the road and I've remembered a story, and then I've interpreted the story and I've applied it to science today. And I've sought out the science that affirms that story, and then I teach that. So that's how we're going to arrive at rebuilding the knowledge base that we once had. but it's going to take quite a bit of time. And that's one of the things that we're not accorded. We are not accorded time to do that. We're not accorded time to do that in school. We're not accorded time to do that at university. And we need to struggle for that time.
Following the recent incidents that have happened with the discovery of those dead bodies of the children in one of the residential schools. And a couple of things that I would like to ask here. Why has the Roman Catholic Church not apologized about the atrocities committed in the school run by the church? I understand most of the residential schools were run by the Roman Catholics. And the second question is, it seems to me that the mainstream media in Canada seem to have forgotten about the crime against the humanity. Why is this situation existing? My questions have been typed on the chat.
Did you hear the question, Samir?
Yeah, the first question was why is the Roman Catholic Church not apologizing for the 200 graves found recently? And why is the Canadian media not getting involved in it and helping it?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of hate in this country for us. And I think it has to do with if people don't hate us, then they have to look at us as nations that were here before, and they have to look at us as people who they emigrated to. Now, here's the thing. If I were to move to, say, Germany, I would have to learn the German language. I would be expected to follow German law. I would expect to learn about German things, German culture. And I would expect to adopt the German legal relationship to the land. When people came here, they killed us. And then they justified it. And the justification, one of which is the result is hate. And so because we're recalcitrant and stubborn and won't let go of our original beliefs, they discourage people from accepting anything about us. For instance, this is the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon. I would be expected to speak Anishinaabe or Mohawk as a newcomer. That's what would be required of me if the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon was in charge of this territory. You would be expected to learn Ani instead of hello, Miigwech instead of thank you, and so on and so forth. Yawago. These things are part of what you would be integrating yourself into, a place called the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon. But that's not the case. The case is that you become part of the privatization of the nations that existed here before. And that's not how we did things in the past. We did not privatize the land. We did not desecrate our mother's breast. We did not dig holes in her, and so on and so forth. The laws that apply to this land are dismembering laws and oppressive laws toward the earth. And we are not like that. We do not agree with that. So if you don't abide by our laws, then you have to abide by Canadian law. If you abide by Canadian law, then you're dismembering the earth, dismembering the land, dismembering your relationship to the land.
When the residential schools, the system that was followed, was it like forced upon the children of the First Nations to follow a particular belief system? And did they follow that?
I think you're not listening. I think just want to say this to you, that you need to take into consideration what's being said and really think about it. You put a little puppy in a cage, and you poke it with sticks and poke it with sticks and don't allow it to eat until it grovels. That's what happened to us.
Right.
Now, you're expecting us to get out of that institution whole. We were not entitled to go home and learn from our elders for almost 100 years, 80 years. And then we were sent home. And the only Christianity, the only religion that we had was Christianity. And we were on our knees from 6 in the morning till 8, which is when we got to eat a little bit of breakfast. And then we learned again throughout the school year, not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but more Christianity. So that we came out of there completely terrorized, inept in our own way, and crippled. Crippled emotionally, crippled spiritually, crippled intellectually. And no one in this country is giving us 5 feminist minutes to try and undo the damage. That's what you're not giving me. That's what you won't give me. That's what Canadians won't give me. You see what I'm getting at now? Do you understand the level of the damage that we have to undo? And we are working on that. We've gone from 90% alcoholism to sobriety in my community. We are a sober community. We aren't beating each other. We aren't raping each other. We aren't tormenting each other. And we are learning our language again. And only in 60 years, in only 2 generations, we have remedied the damage that took place over almost 500 years. We know what to do. We do know what to do. And what you can do is accept what we do. That's the only right I give you. Just like I accept how you are. I accept there are Christians in the world. I don't understand it. And I'm not a Christian, but I'm not rejecting it as a faith system. When it says thou shalt not kill, I think, well, that's probably a good idea. As long as no one's attacking you. But I can't ascribe to a faith that I would violate. Christians, on the other hand, they ascribe to a faith that they themselves violate. I don't understand that. I really don't. But I wish them luck. I wish them luck. And I hope that somebody wishes me luck in restoring the terrorization of 500 years.
Right? My question is, your spiritual traditions probably were, because of the education system in the past couple of centuries and so on, there was a break. So how do you keep up with the spiritual traditions? And also, what does the younger generation of today, say 20-ish, 25-year-old people think about those traditions and how do they follow them?
I actually did answer this question already. That the first thing we did was restore our ceremonies. And inside those ceremonies is where the knowledge resides. Someone like myself, I rely on the body itself to tell me what's coming next down the pipe. The tradition is not so important to me as the knowledge. And I'll tell you again that story of the crabs walking on land. What's going on? The crabs are walking on the land. They're not supposed to walk on the land. They don't usually walk on the land. What are they trying to tell us? Now, Western science doesn't ask what the trees are trying to tell them, what the bears are trying to tell them, what the cows are trying to tell them. They don't ask anything like that. They take a little vial of whatever and they examine it. They dissect it. That's how they learn. I'm not opposed to that kind of learning. It's just not my way of learning. So what I'm doing now is restoring culture, not, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but it's a matter of reclaiming what we already had before, researching what was there before, and re-listening to our bodies in the way that we've always heard them, and reassembling who we are. And this takes time. And I don't know how many times I got to say that. Nobody wants to give us 5 feminist minutes to do that. It's like people expect us to come out of the womb fully dressed. We can't come out of the womb fully dressed. We must make clothes and we must recognize that we need clothes and we have to examine what kind of clothes we need to make and so on. I have a list of books. You can see it on the web, Vivek. I have about 13 books that I've written.
Okay, Lee, I think we have covered 1 hour and that was a very enlightening 1 hour. I think all our audience are going back with a lot of knowledge and with a heavy heart after listening to the story and the atrocities. And I would encourage everyone to get closer to the Indigenous community here in Canada and those who are in India to learn more